They said I'd only be staying a few weeks, just until I got back on my feet. You'll heal faster here, Angie had said, her voice all silk and soft smiles, and we'd love the help with the kids anyway. Darren nodded like it was already decided. I didn't want to intrude, but I also couldn't manage the stairs in my old townhouse anymore, not since the fall. My hips still ached, and my pride was bruised more than anything else. So I packed 3 bags, one with clothes, one with medications and ointments, and the last one, smaller, worn at the corners, with my recipe cards, my ledger notebook, and a handful of handwritten letters from Charles, my late husband. I wasn't planning to stay long, just long enough to feel strong again. I thought I was stepping into a season of healing. I didn't know I was walking into a quiet goodbye. Angie had lit a eucalyptus candle by the front door when I arrived. The house smelled like a catalog. Clean, curated. Not a single photo on the wall looked older than 5 years. The furniture was beige and geometric. We wanted to create a neutral space, she said when she saw me looking around. I smiled and said nothing. There was no sign of the crocheted Afghan I gave them for their anniversary, or the oak side table Charles and I gifted them when they bought this house. Everything looked like it belonged to someone who had no past. I followed Angie upstairs, limping slightly, and she opened the door to the guest room. "You'll be comfortable here," she said. The room was spotless, cold in a polished way, not a single wrinkle in the bedspread. There was a diffuser on the dresser and a quote on the wall that read, "Let go to grow." That night, I couldn't sleep. The mattress was firmer than I was used to, and I kept thinking about the ceramic spice rack I'd boxed for them after Charles passed. I wondered if they still used it, if it even made it out of the garage. The next morning, I limped into the kitchen and reached for a mug, but they'd rearranged the cabinets. Angie was already dressed in leggings and a high ponytail, blending something green in a blender that roared like an engine. "Morning," she said brightly. "Coffee's in the French press. Feel free to help yourself." Darren was scrolling through his phone at the kitchen island. He looked up briefly, gave me a small nod, and went back to whatever he was reading. I told myself it was just adjustment. New rhythms, new routines. I told myself not to expect too much. Still, I tried. That week, I made my lemon loaf, the one Darren used to request on Sundays when he was little. I wrapped it in wax paper and left it on the counter. No one mentioned it. I offered to drive the kids to school one morning, but Angie said she had it covered. I folded laundry, made the beds, vacuumed the downstairs hall. "You really don't have to do all that," Angie said sweetly. "We've got a system." I smiled and nodded. I was trying not to step on toes, but the feeling crept in slowly, like being a house guest in a place that used to feel like family. Darren barely looked me in the eye. He wasn't unkind, just absent, as if whatever part of him used to call me Mom had been filed away with the baby books and backyard memories. Angie was always polite, but her words came like stage lines, measured, practiced. It was in the way she smiled while offering tea, but never asked if I liked Earl Grey. In the way she opened doors for me, but closed every conversation before it could become real. On Sunday, I asked if I could roast a chicken. It had been years since I used their oven, but the thought of seasoning it the way Charles used to made me feel like myself again. Angie hesitated, then said, "Actually, we've gone mostly plant-based, but we can order something nice if you're craving something heavier." I said no, of course. I didn't want to be a bother. I just wanted to feel useful again, seen again. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed with the worn recipe box in my lap. Charles had built it from scrap cedar decades ago. My hands shook a little as I opened it. His handwriting was still on the first index card. "Cornbread. Use extra buttermilk for moisture." I ran my fingers over it, let the scent of old flour and thyme rise from the cards like a prayer. I wasn't angry yet, just unsettled. I thought maybe I needed more time to adjust. Maybe they did too. But the next morning, I noticed the Afghan I kept at the foot of the bed had been folded and placed in the hallway linen closet. Someone had replaced it with a neutral gray throw. The card I'd taped to the mirror, the one with Charles' favorite Bible verse, was gone. There was a candle in its place now, unscented and unlabeled. I stared at it for a long time. It's strange how erasure never comes in one loud moment. It comes in soft edits, little shifts. A mug moved, a drawer reorganized, a name forgotten. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a quiet redesign. And for the first time, I began to wonder if this wasn't just recovery time for me, but rehearsal time for them. A test to see if they could live with me quietly vanishing into the corners. I didn't say anything, but I started paying closer attention. I started noticing what stayed and what slowly disappeared. I didn't know yet that this would become my revenge story. I just knew something inside me had started whispering, "You are not home here. Not anymore." And when silence is all you're given, sometimes the only power you have left is to record what they think you won't remember. It was the second Sunday since I'd moved in. The house was quiet, unnaturally so. The kind of quiet that hums behind the drywall, where nothing feels settled. I'd baked a peach cobbler the night before, hoping the kids might ask for seconds the way Darren used to. But by the time I came downstairs, it had been moved to the back of the fridge behind a stack of Angie's prepped mason jar salads. Breakfast was flaxseed smoothies and something called mushroom coffee. I tried to smile as I drank my tea in silence. Later that afternoon, after the kids had gone off to a friend's house, Angie invited me to sit with her and Darren in the dining room. She placed a manila envelope on the table, plain and thick, the kind that makes your stomach tighten for no reason at all. "This is just something symbolic," Angie said, sliding it toward me with both hands. "Our family attorney suggested it. Nothing serious. It's called a care waiver. It basically confirms that you're living with us independently. It's just a formality, really." Darren said nothing. He scratched the back of his neck and looked toward the window. I reached for the envelope more out of instinct than decision. My name was typed in all caps on the first page. The language was polite, but the meaning was clear. I would not expect or require support, emotional, physical, or financial, from Darren and Angie now or in the future. I was on paper a guest with no claim to care. I looked up, waiting for Darren to say something, to explain, maybe to laugh and say, "This is silly, Mom, just legal fluff." But he didn't say anything. He just kept staring out at the fence line where the wind was catching the last of the leaves. "You're still family," Angie added quickly, her voice syrupy. "This just keeps things clear for everyone." I held the pen, felt the weight of it. In that moment, 100 memories rushed through me. Bandaging scraped knees, sitting through school meetings, staying up nights when Darren had asthma as a child. Every casserole, every birthday party I organized when they had no time. And now I was being handed a form that said, "Let's not pretend you matter that much." But I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I signed. My signature curved neatly on the bottom line. The pen made a soft sound against the paper. Angie took the form back as if it were a thank you note. She smiled, folded it in half, and said, "Great, I'll take care of it tomorrow." Then she got up to make ginger tea. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the waiver, I'd already signed away too much of myself over the years, but because of the silence in the room. It didn't feel like mine. I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the small ways people remove you before they tell you to leave. And sometimes they don't even say it. They just let you know with forms, rearranged furniture, and voices too sweet to trust. I want to ask you something. Whoever you are out there listening, have you ever signed something thinking it was harmless, only to realize later you were signing yourself away? Not just rights or money, but dignity. If you have, you're not alone. Tell me in the comments, what was the moment you knew someone saw you as a burden, not a person? The next morning, Angie had cleared my knitting basket from the living room. "Just decluttering," she said, trying to open up the space. I found it later in the garage, tucked between a box labeled Christmas and an old dog crate they never used. Darren still wasn't talking much. He'd come home from work, eat dinner in silence, and scroll through his phone while Angie talked about her new wellness clients. I didn't blame him, not exactly. I just wondered where the boy who once drew me Mother's Day cards with crayon hearts had gone. Maybe he thought this was how things worked now. Maybe he thought I wouldn't notice. By the end of the week, the photo of Charles and me at our 40th anniversary dinner was gone from the bookshelf. In its place, Angie had set a minimalist sculpture of hands cupped around a lotus flower. "It's ceramic," she told me proudly. "It got it from a mindfulness retreat. Feels more aligned with the vibe of the house." I smiled, said nothing. I was starting to understand the rules. My name was no longer in the space, so my presence had to follow suit. Every day, something else disappeared. The hand towel I embroidered, the little blue bird salt shaker, even the soup ladle with the crack in the handle that Charles always refused to throw out. One night, I noticed the pantry had been rearranged. My containers were stacked high on a shelf I could no longer reach. A sticky note on the door read, "Streamline, simplify, elevate." I stood there for a long time, one hand on the doorframe. Then I went back to my room, pulled out my old ledger book, the one I used when I taught budgeting at the community center, and I opened to a blank page. At the top, I wrote, "Day 1 erasure log." I didn't know where this would lead yet. I only knew I couldn't let my absence go unrecorded. They had their forms. I would have mine. The first thing to go was the shelf in the hallway. It had always held a few old cookbooks, a framed photo of Charles in his apron holding a burnt pie with that big sheepish grin, and a small ceramic dish I'd made in a pottery class during my short-lived artistic phase. Angie told me the shelf broke the visual flow. She replaced it with a hanging plant and a brass mirror shaped like the sun. I didn't argue. I just stared at the photo of Charles now resting inside a cardboard box, his smile turned downward in the dim light. Later that day, the rug by the entryway disappeared. She said it trapped dust and made the space feel heavy. The next morning, my favorite mug, the one with the tiny chip on the lip that I'd used since Darren was a toddler, was gone from the cabinet. I found it days later, cracked in half and tossed in the trash behind a bag of smoothie bar wrappers. They never said it outright, but the message was clear. Little by little, I was being unstitched from the fabric of the house, not with yelling, not with slammed doors, just edits. Darren didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't know what to say. He'd nod politely when I passed him in the hall, ask if I needed anything from the store, then disappear back into his office or earbuds. He was fading too, in a different way. Like someone watching a slow snowfall and pretending not to feel the cold coming through the window. I tried to keep my mind busy. I organized the pantry, sorted laundry, took small walks when the weather allowed. But every time I returned to my room, another piece of my presence had shifted. The doily on the dresser was replaced with a scented candle I didn't recognize. My hand lotion was moved from the nightstand into a drawer. And then one day, the quilt my mother stitched for me after Charles and I married, faded pink with little violets, was gone from the foot of the bed. I asked Angie if she'd seen it. "Oh, that old thing?" she said, barely looking up from her laptop. "I thought it might be time to retire it. It was getting a bit threadbare." I didn't answer. I couldn't trust my voice. The next morning, I went looking for it. I found the quilt stuffed into a donation bag in the trunk of Angie's SUV. My initials were still embroidered in the corner, hand-stitched in navy blue thread. I didn't take it back. I just stood there for a while, holding the edge of the fabric like it might speak. When I came back inside, the dining room chairs had been rearranged. The one Charles always sat in, the one with the worn cushion and the slight wobble, was gone. A new chair with sleek metal legs had taken its place. It looked like it belonged in a showroom, not in a home. That night, I couldn't eat. Angie talked about converting the garage into a yoga studio. "It's wasted space," she said brightly. "We need to let the energy move again." Darren said nothing, just sipped his water and nodded like a man who had stopped forming opinions. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan as it creaked softly. And I realized this wasn't about decor. It wasn't about freshness. It wasn't even about me being a guest in their home. It was about erasure. One memory at a time, one object at a time, until nothing remained that could remind anyone that I had ever been part of this place. The next day, I wrote in my ledger again, Day 7, erasure log Charles chair gone, quilt removed, mug destroyed, shelf replaced, pantry reorganized, name not spoken. There was a line at the bottom I stared at for a long time before writing, "I am vanishing while still alive." And that was the moment the ache in my chest changed. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't confusion. It was something sharper, something still and cold like the inside of a locked freezer. This wasn't just neglect, it was choreography. They were making room for a version of their life where I had never existed. So I started taking mental photographs. I started naming things in my head as I walked past them, like a museum guide for my own life. That's the corner where Charles dropped the gravy on Thanksgiving 2009. That's the windowsill where Darren used to line up his toy cars. That's the drawer where I kept the church bulletins and candy for the kids. I named them to remember them because I knew soon they'd be gone too. That afternoon, I opened the closet and noticed something else. My scarves were missing, the silk ones Charles used to bring me from little shops when we traveled. Angie later mentioned she'd recycled some old textiles to make room for winter coats. I smiled, politely. Then I sat on the edge of my bed, pulled out my recipe box and flipped through the cards, not to cook, but to feel anchored to something no one could throw away. Each card held a memory they couldn't sanitize or fold into a storage bin. Each splatter of sauce, each corner curled with time, it was mine. I didn't speak up, not yet, but I kept writing. And when I looked in the mirror that night, I didn't see a guest. I saw a witness, a quiet witness to a quiet kind of cruelty. And sometimes witnessing is the first act of resistance. There's a quiet kind of grief when people stop using your name. It doesn't happen all at once. It trickles in like a leak under the sink, slow, silent, and destructive. I noticed it first when Angie was on the phone with a friend. I was walking past the kitchen when I heard her say, "Yeah, Darren's mom is staying with us for a bit, just until she's back on her feet." No tone, no warmth. Just a flat, passing mention, like she was talking about an old lamp someone dropped off at Goodwill. She didn't say Mabel. She didn't say Mom. Just Darren's mom. That's when I started paying attention. At the dinner table, I spoke less. Not because I had nothing to say, but because no one was listening. Darren scrolled through his phone. Angie talked about her new branding ideas for her wellness blog, which she was now calling Root and Rise. She showed him a sample logo. It's more modern, less busy, more intentional. He nodded, barely glancing up. No one asked how my hip was healing. No one asked what I'd done that day. Once I mentioned that I used to balance the books for the local farmers co-op, and Angie blinked. Like I'd just told her I flew helicopters. "Huh," she said. I never knew that. Now, I'd told her that 3 times over the years. I stopped keeping track. Later that week, I overheard Angie hosting a video call in the living room. Her voice carried down the hall as she led a group of women in a guided mindfulness session. "Let's talk about boundaries," she said. "Sometimes people stay in your space too long. You love them, but their presence disrupts your peace." There was laughter, agreement. Someone said, "Totally. I had to move my MIL out last year." Angie nodded into the screen, her smile wide. "Exactly. Sometimes you just need a fresh start." She never mentioned my name, but she didn't have to. That night, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling, thinking about how often I used to be called Mom. The word had felt warm once, needed. It used to come at midnight after a nightmare, or over the phone when a recipe went wrong, or when a grandchild scraped a knee and only Grandma knew how to kiss it right. Now I was just a presence, a placeholder, a background character. They were slowly fading out of the picture. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by to drop off a package that had been misdelivered. "Is Mabel home?" she asked when Angie opened the door. Angie blinked, hesitated just a second too long, then said, "Oh, Darren's mom? Yeah, she's upstairs resting." I was sitting in the hallway. I heard every word. And the thing is, it wasn't even malicious. That's what made it hurt more. It wasn't hate. It was disconnection. I wasn't important enough to hate. I was just edited out, softly, efficiently. The next day, I went to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I used to keep my notepad, the one I used to write shopping lists and weekly menus back when I helped manage meals. The drawer was empty. Angie had labeled it "Kid Snacks" in black marker. My notepad was gone. So was the pen Charles had given me, the one that still had a bit of green ink left. I found it in the trash under a banana peel. I didn't cry. Not then. I just walked back to my room, picked up my ledger, and wrote, Day 14. Notepad's gone. Name gone. No one asks where I go. I started whispering my name when I was alone. Not in a dramatic way, just to hear it. Mabel. I'd say it to the mirror, to the kettle, to the cat that sometimes walked along the fence in the backyard. Just so I wouldn't forget, it belonged to me. On Sunday, we had company over, Angie's sister and her husband. I made a peach crumble, the kind I knew her brother-in-law liked. I set it gently on the counter. No one acknowledged it. At dinner, Angie introduced me. This is Darren's mom. She's staying upstairs while she recovers. No one looked uncomfortable. No one blinked. Even Darren didn't say a word. So I sat there eating salad I didn't ask for, nodding politely while they talked about office politics and toddler sleep schedules. I was background noise in a life I once gave everything to. When everyone had left and the kitchen was half clean, I quietly took the leftover peach crumble and wrapped it in foil. I brought it up to my room, sat on the bed, ate 2 bites, not because I was hungry, but because I needed to taste something I made, something mine. Later that night, I opened a new page in my ledger. Day 15, introduced without a name. Peach crumble, ignored. Smile practiced. Silence thicker than air. There's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being surrounded by people who've chosen to forget what you meant to them. And that kind of forgetting, that's what breaks you. Not in a loud crash, but in the quiet click of a door closing while your name disappears behind it. It started with a list. Not a dramatic gesture, not some revenge plot, just a simple list, scratched in pencil on the back of a grocery receipt I found folded between the pages of old-fashioned pies and cobblers. I'd opened my recipe box that morning, more out of habit than hope. The air smelled like rain and distant lemons. I flipped through cards Charles had seen 100 times. He used to joke, "You could build an empire with these." Back then, it felt like flattery. Now it felt like prophecy I had never believed in. I took out 3 cards, peach crumble, molasses cookie sounds, chicken and dumplings, and placed them on my bed. My fingers brushed the handwriting. Not all of it was mine. Some cards were written by my mother, a few by friends long gone, but most of them had my flower-flecked loops and notes. Add nutmeg if guests coming. Let dough rest. Patience is flavor. They weren't just recipes. They were memory holders, and suddenly I realized no one could take these. Not Angie, not Darren, not this house with its hollow white walls. This box was mine. It was me. So I made the list. I called it Things That Belong to Me. My recipe box. My memories of Charles. My hands that still know how to knead, even if they shake. My name. My silence, but only because I choose it. I put the list in my ledger. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I baked. Not for them, not to be seen. Just because I still could. I made the molasses cookies first, Charles's favorite. The smell curled through the house, rich and sharp and sweet. Angie popped her head in, startled. "Oh, wow, that smells nostalgic." I nodded, didn't offer her one. She didn't ask. I brought 2 cookies up to my room, placed them beside my tea. I lit a candle. I ate slowly, like I was honoring a ceremony no one else needed to attend. And then I began organizing the recipe cards. Not alphabetically, not by category, by meaning. The ones Charles loved. The ones I made when money was tight. The ones passed down from women whose names I remembered only in flavors. Each category got a ribbon. I began copying them by hand into a new notebook. Thicker, cleaner, bound in brown leather. A gift from myself to my future. That evening, while Angie was busy rebranding her website and Darren was watching something with headphones on, I drafted a document on my old iPad. I called it the Mabel Trust. It wasn't legal, not yet. But it was the beginning. I wrote down my intentions. To transfer my intellectual property, these recipes, this knowledge, this lived experience, into a trust that would one day fund a kitchen program for older women who'd been forgotten. To publish these recipes under my name, not as a celebrity chef, but as someone who had survived being unseen. To dedicate it to Charles and to myself. I didn't need applause. I didn't need my name in lights. I just needed one quiet place in the world that remembered me. Properly. The next morning, I emailed a former student of mine, a young woman named Claire, who'd helped me with a fundraiser years ago and had gone on to become a nonprofit attorney. I told her I had an idea I wanted to protect. She replied within the hour. "Let's talk, Ms. Mabel. I remember your oatmeal pies. I've thought of them every winter since." I smiled for the first time in weeks. That same afternoon, Angie asked if I could move some of my books to the attic. "Just to make space," she said. "The kids need more shelf room." I looked her in the eye and said, "No thank you, these stay." She blinked, surprised. "Oh, okay." That was it. No argument, no drama, just the first boundary. That night, I baked again, this time cornbread. I added extra buttermilk, just like Charles liked it. I wrapped half of it up and wrote a label. To Claire, from Miss Mabel. I'd mail it tomorrow. Back in my room, I placed the new leather notebook on the dresser. I stared at it for a long time. I was no longer waiting for them to give me space. I was claiming it. Quietly. The message came at 10:42 a.m. on a Wednesday. I was folding laundry in my room, my own clothes, the only things I still fully controlled in this house, when my phone buzzed softly. It was from a number I hadn't saved, but I knew it instantly. "Hello, Mrs. Mabel. This is Gregory Dorset. I was your late husband's attorney. I believe we should talk." I sat down slowly on the bed, heart still but hands trembling. I hadn't spoken to Gregory since Charles passed, but Charles trusted him. Deeply. Said more than once, "If something ever happens to me, you call Greg. Don't let anyone else handle it." I hadn't called, because I hadn't needed to. Until now. I texted back, and within the hour we were on a video call. He looked older, his beard fully gray now, but his voice was steady, respectful. "Mrs. Mabel," he said, "your husband left a sealed trust. It was triggered by two events, his passing, and specifically, your removal from the home you both shared." I blinked. "Triggered how?" He smiled gently. "You're the sole beneficiary of a trust valued at approximately $6.8 million. He left it in your name only. No shared access. And he left specific instructions to contact you once he believed, by your own terms, you were being treated as expendable." I stared at the screen. "He knew this might happen?" "He planned for the possibility." Greg said, "Your husband wanted you to be safe and free. This trust is protected, irrevocable. It's yours, and no one else has access." I didn't cry, not right then, but I felt something deep inside settle, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. Charles had seen this coming. Maybe not the details, but the outline. He always knew I was too quiet for a fight, but not too quiet for a plan. I asked him what to do next. "First," Greg said, "we'll open a private account under your name. You'll have full access. Then if you want, I can arrange relocation options, or you can use it how you wish. Also, he left something else. A letter. I'll have it delivered." I thanked him. I ended the call. Then I sat there in my room on the bed where I'd been ignored for weeks and smiled. It wasn't just about the money. It was the fact that someone, Charles, had believed me worthy of protection. That even in his absence, he was still saying, "You matter. You are not invisible." That night, I made beef stew. Not for anyone else. Just for myself. I ate quietly while Angie worked on a wellness reel downstairs, and Darren played video games with noise-canceling headphones. The next morning, I mailed two things. A notarized letter Greg had prepared, ensuring the trust's legal protections were executed immediately. A package to Claire, the nonprofit lawyer, containing the first 5 recipes from my new cookbook, and a proposal to create a small foundation. I also added her a note. This isn't just about food, it's about dignity. Let's feed the ones who've been erased. I didn't say anything to Darren or Angie. I still cooked when I wanted to, still folded my own laundry, but I no longer offered to help with the kids, no longer jumped when Angie made a passive-aggressive comment about clutter. I had built my own inner space, and now I was furnishing it with clarity. Here's where I want to bring you in, anyone who's listening. Have you ever had someone believe in you so much that their love reached beyond the grave? That even after everything, you found out you weren't as forgotten as you felt? Tell me below. I want to hear it. Because when we share these stories, we remind each other that love can outlive silence. A few days later, the envelope arrived. Charles's handwriting was still familiar, looping and uneven. I opened the letter slowly. Inside, just a few sentences. If they ever make you feel small, remember, you built this family. You fed it. You softened every hard year. What you gave cannot be erased. And what's yours will return to you. Love, Charles. I held that letter for a long time. Then I placed it inside the front cover of the leather recipe book, not as a symbol, as a foundation. That weekend, Angie knocked on my door. Hey, just a heads up. We're having friends over next Saturday. Kind of a kid-free adult evening. Thought maybe you could, I don't know, have a night out or something? I looked at her, then calmly said, "Thanks for the heads up." I didn't offer to leave. I didn't explain anything. I was done apologizing for existing. Because somewhere out there, a trust had been activated. And inside me, another kind of trust had been restored. Saturday came without fanfare. The house buzzed with preparation. Darren carrying folding chairs from the garage, Angie lighting candles that smelled like rosemary and lime. She wore a linen jumpsuit and had her hair pinned up like she was about to host a lifestyle segment. No one said a word to me all morning. I made myself tea, ate a quiet breakfast, then retreated to my room and closed the door. No one knocked. No one asked if I'd be joining them. For the first time, I wasn't invited. Not officially, not even out of politeness. But that absence didn't sting the way I thought it would. It felt clean, final, like a page turned. I listened from upstairs as guests began to arrive. Laughter floated up the stairwell. There was music, something with a ukulele and too many tambourines. I smiled just slightly at how curated it all sounded. Instead of sitting in silence, I pulled out the small suitcase I'd kept tucked under the bed. Inside, 2 changes of clothes, my leather-bound recipe journal, and Charles's letter. I'd packed it 2 days earlier, not out of panic, out of peace. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving for the weekend. I simply got dressed, dark jeans, soft cardigan, lipstick Charles always said made me look alive again, and walked out the front door. No one noticed. I called a car. The driver, a soft-spoken young man named Luis, greeted me kindly. "Where to, ma'am?" "Just take me to the coast," I said. "Anywhere I can hear the ocean." We drove for 2 hours, the air turning saltier the closer we got. When we arrived at the seaside bed and breakfast I'd quietly booked, I breathed in so deeply it hurt a little. The kind of hurt that says, "You've been holding your breath too long." The room was small but sun-filled, a quilted bedspread, old rocking chair, a balcony that faced the waves. No branded candles, no essential oil diffusers, just real air and space. I spent the first afternoon walking along the shore barefoot. The cold sand grounded me in a way no meditation app ever had. I didn't think about Darren or Angie. I didn't wonder what their guests thought. I just walked until my knees ached and the light turned amber. That night, I wrote a single sentence in my journal. I didn't disappear. They just stopped looking. At breakfast the next morning, I sat near the window with a book and ordered a stack of blueberry pancakes. The waitress, a woman my age with soft hands and a southern lilt, said, "That's my favorite thing to serve. No one makes time for pancakes anymore." "I do," I smiled. "Now I do." Later that day, I called Claire. We talked for an hour about the foundation. She said she'd secured interest from a local women's shelter to host cooking workshops once a month. They said the idea of cooking with someone who remembers when kitchens had soul really touched them. "Tell them I remember more than that." I said. I remember what it's like to be needed and what it's like not to be. That evening, I sat on the porch and watched the tide roll in, my feet tucked under a wool blanket. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. There's something powerful about choosing absence before someone erases you. It's not running away, it's reclaiming distance on your own terms. I didn't slam a door, I didn't scream, I just walked out and chose not to look back. And as I sat there, sipping lukewarm tea, a thought crept in. What if I never told them where I'd gone? What if the silence they gave me, I simply handed back? That night, I received a text from Darren. Hey, where are you? Everything okay? No mom, no warmth, just confusion. I stared at the screen, then turned the phone off. It wasn't out of spite, it was clarity. For once, they didn't know where I was, but I did. The house felt bigger without her, not in a good way. Sunday morning came, and Darren stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the coffee machine. He wasn't sure why it bothered him that the filters were out, or that the mugs were still in the dishwasher from the night before. He usually didn't notice these things. Somehow, they were always just done. He opened the pantry. No oatmeal, no bananas, no eggs in the fridge either. The kids were cranky, pacing, and whining about cereal. Angie snapped at them, then sighed. Why are things such a mess this morning? Darren muttered, Where's Mom? Angie looked up. I thought she was in her room. She wasn't. And when Darren knocked, the room felt too still. The bed made. No cardigan slung across the chair. No faint scent of her lavender lotion in the air. He opened the door, empty. He checked her closet. A few hangers were missing. Her quilt. Gone. The recipe box was no longer on the dresser. Her mug wasn't in the sink. She left, Darren said flatly. Angie raised a brow. What do you mean? She's gone. She packed a bag. She's not here. They both stood there in silence. No note, no goodbye, not even a passive-aggressive post-it. It was as if she'd vanished. And in her absence, something else rose. An unease neither of them could name. I mean, she's done this before, right? Angie offered, though even she didn't sound convinced. No, Darren said quietly. She hasn't. By lunchtime, the house felt foreign, not because something bad had happened, but because something good was missing. Darren tried to fry eggs, but burned them. The smoke alarm chirped once before settling. The kids refused to eat toast. One of them knocked over a cup of milk. By late afternoon, Angie texted Mabel. Hey, just checking in. Everything okay? No reply. She waited 15 minutes and texted again. If you need anything, let us know. Still silence. By dinner time, the weight of her absence had thickened. Darren walked through the living room and noticed the Afghan was gone from the back of the couch, the one she used to drape over her legs while folding laundry. He reached for the remote and realized the batteries were dead. Usually, they weren't. Everything that used to hum quietly in the background, the warmth, the order, the smell of fresh coffee, folded socks, that little bowl of mints on the hallway table, was just gone. That night, Angie stood in the kitchen holding a bag of takeout. I know you think she's just taking a break, she said, but do you think she's coming back? Darren didn't answer right away. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I don't know, he said. He pulled out his phone and called, straight to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. Later, when the kids were asleep, Angie scrolled through old photos on her phone. One caught her eye. Mabel holding their youngest, rocking him in the backyard under that old oak tree. She was laughing, her head tilted back, eyes full of light. Not like the version they'd slowly stopped seeing, not like the woman who moved through the house unnoticed. I didn't think she'd leave, Angie murmured. I thought she just needed space. Darren looked at her, brow tense. We gave her space. Maybe too much. Angie turned the phone over. Or maybe we gave her the wrong kind. They didn't talk much after that. The silence felt different now. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that makes you listen harder because you're afraid of what's missing. On Monday morning, Darren found a stack of envelopes in the mailbox. One was addressed to him, his name printed in familiar, careful handwriting. Inside was a simple card. I'm safe, I'm well, and I'm not lost. I've just chosen to be where I'm seen. Mom. There was no return address, no explanation, just truth. Darren read the card 3 times before setting it down. He didn't tell Angie right away. He just sat with it, shoulders slumped, suddenly aware of how loud the house had become without her soft steps on the stairs, the faint rattle of her teacup, the whisper of her moving through a room without needing applause, because sometimes the most powerful noise is the one that's no longer there. The first thing I bought was a kettle. Not fancy, just sturdy stainless steel, no blinking lights or smart functions. It whistled. That was enough. I carried it back to the little rental cottage I'd found 2 miles inland from the coast. It was small, just 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, a creaky porch, but it was mine. Paid for in full in cash by an account no one knew existed. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not Darren, not Angie, not even the neighbor who waved politely each morning but never asked questions. Gregory Dorset had set it all up. Quietly, professionally. The Mabel A. McKinney Living Trust. The bank account, the foundation paperwork, the private P.O. box, the estate plan. Everything Charles had left for me was now under my control, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for permission to live. Claire helped me with the paperwork for the cookbook project. She'd arranged a meeting with a small publishing house in Portland who specialized in memoir-style cookbooks. The editor, a woman named Judith, said after reading my introduction, "You don't write like someone who wants revenge. You write like someone who's reclaiming her story." And I told her, that's all I ever wanted, to not be rewritten. We began selecting recipes: peach crumble, cornbread, oatmeal pie, chicken and dumplings. I sent photos, hand-scanned recipe cards, and little stories to go with each one. I wrote the way I cooked, slowly, carefully, tasting along the way. While all of that was moving forward, I made sure every detail of my financial life was sealed. I changed my will. Removed Darren as primary contact, updated beneficiaries to the foundation, assigned Claire as executor. I wasn't trying to hurt him, but I was done rewarding disregard with inheritance. And I didn't need to say a word to do it. There's something satisfying about moving the pieces quietly, knowing that by the time anyone notices, the whole board has changed. One afternoon, I stood in line at the credit union to finalize a transfer. A woman behind me noticed the name on my file and said, "Mabel McKinney? Were you married to Charles? He used to volunteer at the youth home, didn't he?" I nodded, surprised. "You remember him?" "Of course," she said. "He used to bring sweet tea in summer. Everyone called him Mr. Kindness." I laughed. That name still fit. Back at the cottage, I opened my notebook and wrote, Day 32, bank account set, trust documents filed, cookbook draft at 40%. No one needs to know, but I do. Later that night, I made myself dinner, roasted carrots, brown rice, and a bit of honey-baked salmon. I sat on the porch and ate under a string of mismatched lights the landlord had forgotten to take down. They swayed gently in the wind. I didn't miss the big house. I didn't miss the chaos. I didn't even miss the title Mom, because now I remembered who I was underneath it. And here's where I want to ask you something. Yes, you. Have you ever quietly rebuilt something after being pushed aside? Not loudly, not for show, just for you. Tell me below. Your story might be the reason someone else starts writing their own. The next morning, Claire called. "I sent you something," she said. "Check your inbox." It was the first mock-up of the cookbook cover. My name in soft script, Mabel's Table. Recipes from a life well lived. Below it, a photo of my hands rolling dough. Not my face, not my house, just the part of me that never stopped creating. I stared at it for a long time. Then I emailed Claire back. "Make the title smaller. The story is what matters." She replied, "That's exactly why it works." Back at the house, I burned a CD of old songs Charles used to hum while washing dishes. I played it that evening as I tidied up. The smell of lemon oil, fresh linen, and something warm baking in the oven wrapped the space in memory. But this time, it wasn't nostalgic. It was present. because I wasn't waiting to be remembered anymore. I was actively making sure I wouldn't forget myself. And I finally understood. Financial freedom wasn't just about money. It was about decisions, about being able to say yes, no, maybe later, about never again having to ask, "Can I stay?" I had already stayed with myself. By the end of the second week, the house didn't just feel emptier, it felt off balance. Darren was late for work twice because he'd forgotten to set his alarm. Mabel used to knock gently on his door every morning. Not anymore. The laundry piled up. The kitchen sink stayed full. No warm cornbread appeared on the counter. The fridge had milk, but no one remembered to throw out the old lettuce, now rotting in the bottom drawer. Angie tried to keep things together. She posted a family photo on social media, an older one with Mabel cropped out. Then a friend commented, "Where's your mother-in-law? I loved her stories." Angie didn't respond. One night, while scrolling through her phone in bed, she turned to Darren and said, "I think she's serious this time." He didn't answer right away, just stared at the ceiling, arms crossed behind his head. "She hasn't called," he finally said, "not even to check on the kids." "Do you blame her?" Angie asked. Not harsh, just honest. He said nothing. The kids started asking too. "Where's Grandma?" the youngest said while coloring. "I miss her pancakes." "She's on a little break," Darren offered, voice thin. But even they could tell something was different. Then came the letter from the lawyer, a thick cream envelope addressed in clean print. Inside, legal language Darren couldn't quite digest. A formal update to Mabel's estate plan. He was no longer listed as primary beneficiary. His name was only mentioned once, in a clause that made it clear he had no legal authority over her affairs. There was a note tucked inside, handwritten, just one line. "I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself." He read it 5 times, then sat very still. The next morning, Darren didn't go to work. He just paced the backyard, eyes unfocused. The oak tree where Mabel used to sit in the afternoons now looked bare, like it had lost its purpose. Later that evening, he sat alone at the kitchen table. Angie stood across the room, arms folded. "Do you think she's ever coming back?" he asked quietly. Angie shook her head. "I think she already did everything she needed to. We just didn't see it." They stood there in silence for a long time. The dishwasher beeped. No one moved. Darren didn't plan to drive out there, not at first, but after another night of sitting in silence, after another dinner that ended with dishes still in the sink and no one speaking, something cracked open in him. A memory, maybe. A guilt he hadn't let himself feel. He got in the car early Sunday morning before the kids woke up and drove with no real destination. Just a name he vaguely remembered from a letter. Crescent Pines, the coastal town where her attorney was based. The roads narrowed as he drove, pine trees rising tall on either side. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that forces you to think. He found the cottage almost by accident. A white picket fence, chipped but clean. Flower pots along the porch, mismatched chairs. It looked like a life that had been rebuilt, not rushed but reclaimed. Mabel was sitting on the porch, reading, a cup of tea beside her. She looked up when he pulled in but didn't stand. Darren stepped out slowly, like approaching a memory. "Hi, Mom." She nodded, calm, steady. "Darren, I didn't know where else to go. I'm surprised you came," she said, not unkind, just truthful. He stood awkwardly at the base of the porch steps. "I got the letter from the lawyer." She nodded again. "I figured. I didn't know you were working on a book," he said, gesturing toward the journal on her lap. "You never asked," she replied. The silence between them wasn't hostile. It was instructional. Darren looked around. "You've done all this?" She smiled, almost to herself. "I needed a space that didn't see me as a burden." He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. Instead, he sat down slowly on the bottom step like a boy again. "Mom, I think I really messed up." She looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, there was softness in her eyes, but not permission. "You didn't just forget me, Darren. You stopped seeing me. And then you got used to it." He didn't argue. He couldn't. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said, barely above a whisper. I'm sure you did, she said. But good intentions don't replace presence or gratitude. A breeze moved through the trees. The wind chimes behind her door let out a few soft notes. Mabel looked toward them, then back at him. I'm not angry anymore, she said, but I've stopped waiting to be invited. Darren swallowed hard. I miss you. She looked at him gently. You miss the version of me that made your life easier, but I've moved on from that version. He blinked. Does that mean I can't be part of your life again? It means you'll have to earn it, she said. I'm not keeping anyone out. I'm just done being erased. He sat there for a while longer. She didn't offer him tea, didn't invite him in, but she didn't send him away either. Eventually, he stood. Okay, I understand. She looked up, this time with something almost like grace. Do you? He paused. Not fully, but I'm willing to try. Good, she said. Start with listening. He nodded and turned to go. As he walked back to the car, he felt the weight of a door that hadn't been slammed shut, but one he no longer had the key to. Behind him, Mabel went back to her journal. One more recipe to write. One more line to claim as her own. The morning of the inaugural workshop dawned clear and cool, and I felt more anticipation than I had in years. I slipped into my favorite apron, soft cotton, pale sage with tiny daisies embroidered at the pocket, and carried my leather-bound recipe journal down the front steps of the cottage. In one hand, I held Charles's letter, folded neatly. In the other, a small kettle I'd polished until it gleamed. Today, the Klein Culinary Foundation would welcome its first group of women, and I was both hostess and teacher in a room I'd helped create. At the community center, long tables were set with bowls of fresh vegetables, measuring spoons, and colorful plates. Claire bustled around, greeting volunteers, and I watched as each woman filed in, some tentative, others awake with curiosity. They ranged in age and background, but all shared that glimmer in their eyes, the desire to be seen. One woman, clutching a worn purse, paused at the doorway. She looked at me and gave a small nod as if to say, I've been waiting for this. We began with introductions. I told them my name, shared a slice of my story, and opened Charles's letter. If they forget what you gave, let it be because they held it too sacred to parade, not because they let it fade. Heads nodded, a few eyes glistened. The room felt alive. As the workshop unfolded, I guided them through a simple bread recipe. Flour, water, yeast, patience. I encouraged questions, laughed at small mistakes, and reminded them that cooking, like life, required both precision and kindness. When one woman's dough stuck to the bowl, I pressed her hand and whispered, "That's how you know you're doing it right." They laughed, not at each other, but with each other, reclaiming a space where their hand and on their stories mattered. Halfway through, Claire slipped me a note. You've changed lives today. I smiled, feeling tears press at my eyes, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. I thought of every mug I'd lost, every quilt that vanished, and how each loss led me here, to this room of women choosing to rise. By afternoon's end, we shared plates of warm bread and honey, and each woman took home a printed recipe card embroidered with their name. As they left, one older woman said, "You gave me more than a recipe. You gave me a lifeline." I hugged her gently and whispered, "We all deserve to be nourished." After cleanup, I sat alone at the head of the table and opened my journal. I wrote a final entry. Today, I was neither unnoticed nor erased. I was present, and so was my purpose. I am still here. I packed my kettle, journal, and letter into a woven basket, locked it, and stepped outside. The late afternoon sun warmed my face. The center's door closed softly behind me, but inside, the voices of women cooking and talking carried on, a steady chorus of memory and hope. Before I walked away, I turned once and said quietly to the empty building, "Thank you for keeping me." Then, I headed down the sidewalk, suitcase in hand, toward whatever awaited next, unafraid, unhurried, and fully myself. Sometimes the deepest kind of revenge story isn't loud or dramatic. It's the quiet return to your own worth, Have you ever felt erased in your own home, in your own family, in a life you once built with love? Maybe they stopped saying thank you. Maybe they stopped asking how you were. Or maybe, over time, you stopped recognizing the person in the mirror because you were always last on the list. And then something changed. A moment, a boundary, a step forward. Did you ever take that quiet step to reclaim your voice, your peace, your name on something again, whether it was a room, a recipe, or a future? Did you walk away not out of anger, but because silence finally became clarity? This story may feel like fiction, but for many of us, it's the truth we've lived. So tell me, when did you choose to return to yourself? What did that moment look like? And how did it change you? Share your story below. Whether one sentence or one chapter, someone out there might be waiting to read exactly what you've been through. Your voice matters more than they ever made you believe.